This aerial view reveals a dense suburban development pushing into the fringes of Austin. These streets represent an attempt to pave over a bloody frontier. Falling into neglect, large sections surrendered back to the thick brush and deep creeks. Beneath the pavement sits the weathered remains of an old horse ranch. This massive Texas live oak served a grim purpose. Historical accounts suggest 4 gallows once hung from limbs exactly like these to deliver frontier justice. That violent history is still mapped onto the present day. Residents in this region routinely navigate commuter roads bearing names like Convict Hill and Slaughter Lane. The local creeks remain dangerous, teeming with copperheads, rattlesnakes, and the highly venomous coral snake. Within these overgrown banks, the winding water serves as a repository for decaying livestock and animal remains that often defy immediate identification. The proximity to the venomous wildlife and the area's violent history creates an oppressive atmosphere. This geography sets the stage for a haunting, less like a ghost story and more like a physical manifestation of the land's own unrest. My cousin Mike lived at the center of this unrest. Throughout his childhood, he claimed to be stalked within his own home by a malevolent entity he named Mommy Ego. Mike described a spirit intent on inflicting some form of metaphysical retribution, yet her behavior followed a specific pattern. She completely ignored Mike's real name. Whenever she addressed him, she called him Ricky. We were left to ask why a spirit would relentlessly target a child while simultaneously refusing to acknowledge who he actually was. My aunt provided a physical description of the figure during a daylight encounter in her garden. She witnessed a woman in antiquated, pilgrim-style clothing, cerulean blue with delicate white lace, riding past her home in a carriage. While my aunt desperately rationalized the figure as a Holy Spirit sentinel, Mike remained unyielding in his dissent. He identified the apparition as the same entity he called Mommy Ego. This antique map shows early 19th century settlements, aligning her attire with the early pioneers. The markers suggest she is a mother caught in a century-old loop of grief, unable to distinguish a modern child from her own lost progeny. Mommy Ego isn't just a shadow, she is a violently delusional echo, forcefully projecting her historical maternal trauma onto the living. This tension followed us into the aunt's garage, a stagnant space dominated by a voluminous deep freezer positioned directly beneath the attic access. The attic portal lacked a door or ladder. It was a stark rectilinear aperture in the ceiling, where the interior dissolved into absolute impenetrable darkness. One afternoon, we entered the garage for a simple childhood treat. Our presence violated the quiet of the room, triggering the faint, ethereal trace of lispering from the shadows above. We looked up to see a woman's semi-curly chestnut tresses dangling from the ceiling void. She was staring down at us from the lightless aperture. She issued a low, resonant moan of profound and performative grief, the sound of a tragic protagonist mourning a dying consort. As the lamentation continued, she began to gnash her teeth and shift her weight, preparing to descend from her sanctuary and physically claim the boy she called Ricky. This is the reality of living on land with a deep, unaddressed history. The moment a passive shadow attempts to bridge the divide and pull the living into its dark loop. We fled the garage in a state of absolute and primal panic, our screams echoing loudly through the house. Desperate for help, I burst into my uncle's quarters and jumped onto the bed, waking him with a heavy impact to his abdomen. He responded with a stern reprimand, initially treating our terror as a domestic intrusion rather than a supernatural event. However, his actions told a different story. He marched back to the hallway, securing the garage entrance with a heavy deadbolt. He checked the handle with a grim, weary expression. It was the look of a man forced to acknowledge an unwelcome reality he'd rather ignore. Mike fled the residence entirely. He stood across the thoroughfare, waiting in the street and refusing to set foot back inside the house. The true horror of Mommy Ego was the realization that maternal loss can leave a permanent metaphysical scar on a landscape. Sometimes the darkest historical mysteries are waiting in the dark, just above our heads.